Hello, everyone. Happy Friday,
Mhm.
everyone.
It was fine.
Very warm welcome to our team coaching circle. It's wonderful to see so many familiar faces joining this session from all over the world as we are celebrating coaching profession together with International Coaching Week and ICF. For those who are newer to this space, very briefly, what is all team coaching about? So it's a professional learning community for team coaches, leadership practitioners, organizational consultants, as we are exploring this evolving edge of team coaching practice together. And my name is Agla Holton. I am team coaching practitioner, leadership coach, and I'll be hosting a conversation today. So, as I briefly mentioned, we're celebrating International Coaching Week in partnership with ICF Ireland chapter, and we have wonderful lineup of conversations to close this week today. So this morning we are starting with Caroline and Jennifer, where we're exploring team coaching ROI, and later today we will be joined by Hannah Linehan, who is going to invite us to look into neurodiversity in team coaching. So both sessions are free of charge, and ICF CCUs are available for those who are collecting them at the end of the session. Now, the reason we specifically wanted to bring today's topic into the community is because while reviewing insights from the recently completed Team Coaching Pulse survey, one theme emerged really strongly: how we measure and demonstrate the value and ROI in team coaching interventions. So first of all, I just wanted to appreciate every one of you who contributed to this survey. We received over 50 responses from practitioners across the field, and we have quite a rich set of rich insights into both the opportunities and challenges which are currently shaping team coaching practice. And as I mentioned, one of the biggest themes which emerged was a challenge of ROI. Many practitioners shared that there is an ongoing tension between pressure for measurable outcomes and then reality that much of the most meaningful team coaching work is very relational, systemic, emergent, making sometimes quite difficult to capture that through traditional metrics alone. So today's conversation feels very timely, and I'm delighted to be able to create the space to explore this together. So I think that we're landing pretty well, and I am genuinely delighted to welcome our two speakers today. Hi, Caroline. Hi, Jen.
Hi,
Hey,
everyone.
Aga.
Good morning. So, by the way, introduction, let me share a little bit about each of those beautiful, wonderful speakers which we have, whom we have today. So, Caroline Duffy is a founder of Op Coaching, and she's experienced team coach who's been working with executive and senior leadership teams across a wide range of sectors for over 20 years. She's a team coaching supervisor as well as faculty member at Team Coaching Studio, where she's mentoring and training team coaches internationally. So great to have you, Caroline, on this call.
Thank you.
And Jennifer Campion is highly experienced leadership team coach with more than a decade of experience supporting senior teams across both public and private sectors. She's also a faculty of Team Coaching Studio, where she is supporting coaches in exploring tools of the work beyond tools and frameworks. So together, Jennifer and Caroline will invite us to explore how we can navigate those complex conversations around ROI in team coaching. So Jen, Caroline, truly delighted to have you today, and over to you.
Thanks, Egla. We're delighted to be here and love seeing in the chat all the places and spaces people are joining us from. So this, I suppose, what to expect from today as we were kind of coming together to think about this conversation. It is really, I suppose, from the school of team coaching that we come from itself, team and situations. So we hope today you'll have space to think about your own story in relationship to return on investment or measurement, what your teams need, and then also understanding what in each particular situation calls for, as Egla mentioned, that drive towards more tangible, structured measurements, but then knowing sometimes actually the real work is less hard, or it's harder to put your finger on it in terms of a measurement. So we hope today you'll explore that. And the way we thought we might do it is think about just evaluation more generally and what that evolution has been over time. We've looked a little bit about the different coaching bodies, say, because that might inform your kind of framing or your school of thought. And then we wanted to share our own experience, but give you time in breakouts with a few prompt questions just to think about what angle you're coming from, what might that need in terms of contracting conversations or blind spots, and then offer you at the end what we might see as a holistic approach, how to do the both and of those ends of the spectrum. So that's the plan for today, but we'd love to know kind of what you're arriving with. So if I could give you a moment to pause and just pop into the chat so we get a sense, what question are you arriving with? So maybe you've a curiosity, maybe you've a hard stance on something, but would love to know so we get a sense and we can kind of tailor the time or the conversation towards it. And Caroline, you might, as you start to see them, call them out there.
Yeah, we're still getting our
We're
hellos from
still
everybody.
thinking, yeah.
Yeah,
Thank you.
curiosity and keen to learn something new,
Lovely.
different perspectives and experiences. Wonderful. Yeah, hopefully our inquiry will bring some of that through.
And so much of it does come from experience, doesn't it? Which is
Yeah,
definitely
yeah,
my lessons learned from.
yeah, yeah,
Is ROI the right way? Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, it'll be interesting, in our kind of reflections today, is there a right way? I guess
Mm.
Jen, we're sitting with that question as we start, aren't we? Lovely. So lots of curiosity and openness, what to offer clients, companies.
Yeah, the organization expectations and
Mhm.
getting buy-in. Yeah.
Lovely.
Okay. So I'll keep an eye on those maybe as we go, and I'll kind of come back anything that we need to. But Caroline, you might bring us to the evolution
So,
of
yeah, we
evaluation.
thought when we were prepping for today, we thought we'd start our inquiry or exploration by just anchoring that into how has the evaluation of learning interventions kind of developed and evolved over time. So that's what this slide hopes to um, I suppose share a little bit. And this brought me way back. I don't know, Jen, if I ever told you I wrote my master's thesis on the evaluation of learning intervention. So I've always had a curiosity around this. So we go back to early thinking on how we evaluate learning. Donald Kirkpatrick, some of you may have heard of this model, but there's lots readily available if you haven't. He created the four levels of evaluation, and they were reaction to the actual event itself. So the learning workshop, whatever that might have been, the training program, how was that? What was your experience of that as a learner? What was the learning then you gained from that? How is that resulting in behavioral change? And what are the results in terms of performance on that? So that's been one of the kind of classic models around evaluation and still holds strong today. So still used, it's the predominant model around evaluation. But it has been challenged and there are flaws with it, and we'll talk a little bit about that. From there, then Jack Phillips started to really think about, well, how do we really track the return on investment? And he started to do work and research that built on Kirkpatrick's four levels by bringing in a fifth level, so to speak, which is about pulling all that together to track the ROI. And that really came from a pressure to justify learning budgets. In terms of, business leaders were questioning what's the return on this if we're investing in training and learning, what are we getting? Completely justified question. The challenge with ROI can be that it's retrospective and it isolates training from other factors. And as we know, there's so much in a system that can impact learning, the transfer of learning and the impact of that. So there's always been challenges around that. Capturing ROI, also just from my field experience over the years with clients, has been it takes a lot of energy. And it's something that many clients have started to think about. Well, if we're doing a big, huge change program that involves learning, we'll track it that way because there's a value in tracking what that might be. What's been interesting over the past 15 years or so is the evolve evolution of return on expectation. And this was almost keeping it in the family. Jim and Wendy Kirkpatrick, Jim, I think is Donald Kirkpatrick's son, kept the thinking alive. And they started to explore with the learning this idea of return on investment. So what that did was broaden out the evaluation of learning to really take in stakeholders and the wider system. So exploring with sponsors, stakeholders, others around the learning participants in terms of what would success look like, what would need to shift and change for this to be successful, and starting that in advance of the process. And through that, then evaluation becomes more co-created and forward-looking. And if you think about that has been coaching has been evolving and team coaching evolving along that side that as well in the past 20 years. So that idea of the kind of broader, more systemic lens on evaluation really sits with what our work as coaches and team coaches then as well. So that's the evolution. And clients will have those different requests or ideas around what they may want in relation to their evaluation. They may have standard internal processes that they'll want you to adapt to, or they may be open to exploring with you how you go about it. So I guess that's where we want to deepen that conversation. But as Jen said, there's we also need to consider the coaching bodies and what they say.
So yeah, we were interested to see kind of what the stance was. So we had a look at the team coaching competencies across the 3 different bodies. So starting with ICF, I suppose it's embedded within the languages of evaluation and measurement, starts within their competency of establishing and maintaining agreements with the team, with stakeholders, with the sponsor, and also then in terms of facilitates client growth. So I suppose the language that's used is much more towards the work itself, is in helping the team to understand what they want for themselves and how do they measure and integrate that learning at the end of it. So less kind of front-facing the way the MCC is, where it has its own standalone evaluation competency. And not only that, but I suppose as you get more senior, there is a requirement not only that you will evaluate, but you have a critical understanding of the different methods of evaluation. So much more pointed, I suppose, maybe towards kind of the terms that it uses in terms of gathering feedback on the process, but also evaluating outcomes with clients and stakeholders, that you have your own processes for evaluating effectiveness, and that you can critically look at diverse approaches. So much more front and center. And then AC, even less so. So there's one competency in terms of measure effectiveness of coaching, but that's simply it. And I suppose then that leaves it open into you designing what that means for you in your coaching practice. So again, I suppose the bodies themselves, and it's probably also in relation to some of the philosophies and ethos that each of the bodies have, there is a broad range of perspectives there. So just important to note as well as you come for any accreditation processes that you know what's required of you, given whichever body you might associate with. So I just thought that was an interesting in terms of how it's positioned, but also good to know in terms of any accreditation that you might do, having just gone through the EMCC one myself. So we kind of then, we suppose we wanted to bring it to life as many of your questions came into the chat there earlier, and I was noting the one around the organization's expectations, because that's really, I suppose, at the heart of my learning as I looked back and thought about where did I really learn around ROI or measuring impact. And I thought of a team I worked with about 5 years ago. So we were just coming out of COVID, and it was in big regulatory body and senior team that were in-house kind of providing legal advice internally. And it was an 18-month program. And I started with an evaluation, so kind of an assessment on team effectiveness measures. but I also did interviews with the team themselves, with two of their senior stakeholders, the team members of the team. And so we did both the quantitative and qualitative, and we had 6 sessions over 18 months and then repeated the process at the end. So the survey again, some interviews again at the end to give both the quantitative and qualitative. So looking back, I suppose the biggest question I would hold is, was I trying to prove the value of team coaching to the team, to the organization, or to myself? Because it was early in the organizational use of team coaching, but also my own. I was shifting from kind of more off-site facilitation, wanting more sustained change and using team coaching as a method for that. So there absolutely was a drive for me to be able to believe and to see the sustained change that might happen through team coaching. So that informed, I suppose, my drive towards the starting and ending of measurements. And look, there was good stuff that I started with in terms of it was systemic by bringing in the voices of the stakeholder and the teams themselves, the direct reports. But the three things that I suppose I take from it and bring into my practice today is the first around kind of the organization's expectations. I went in with an assumption. I assumed because it was in a regulatory body with people in professional services, which I come from myself, that there would be a requirement. So I offered the method of evaluation, and of course they took me up on it. But what I kind of wish I had done then, and I do now do, is we did in the team engagement conversation talk about what success might look like. But I didn't stay with that and follow through the questions around, and how will you know? How do you want to measure it? So starting with their own thinking and encouraging them to start to define how important it was to have measurements and what sort of measurements and how they might own that rather than me as the external team coach. So that's one practice in terms of rather than me rushing in with my mode of offering, have that conversation first. Obviously, I need to have an understanding and something that will match their needs to support them in it, but much more of a co-creation process I take now rather than the rushing in. The second, I suppose, was that the realization that it was the interviews and the measurements themselves are an intervention. So that came up clearly with we had the leader of the team, their boss, interviewed at the start of the engagement, but we also invited him in to join a fishbowl conversation midway. And it really helped him understand the challenge the team was facing around purpose and clarity of purpose, because they were kind of 7 years into existence. And then his realization at the end of the process, as I interviewed him again, what his key role and responsibility was in that. And so that in itself was an intervention. So I suppose viewing evaluation not just as a measurement of progress, but it itself has an impact because you're holding the voice of the system. And as we also interviewed a senior stakeholder, which I suppose is a recipient of the team's expert advice. And disruption happens in team coaching. So it's not about happy sheets at the end of it. As I interviewed her at the end, she came into the conversation quite critical of the team because they were now putting boundaries in place as they had more clarity on their team purpose, which had a negative impact on her team. And as we talked through it, because I'd interviewed her at the start, she started to realize the things she had advised and encouraged the team to do in our first interview, they were practicing, but she hadn't realized the unintended consequences on her own team of what work they might have to take back. So the process of that interview helped her shift from being quite frustrated with the team and feeling as if they hadn't made progress to realizing, oh, they've done exactly as I'd asked. And then the last one, I suppose, is realizing and having a little moment of panic, frustration, but mostly panic as I issued the survey at the end of the engagement, realizing I'm not a statistician. There had been so much that changed in the organization. I had no benchmark over, okay, they're doing the same set of survey questions again, but so much had changed in the context and the situation. How much of this is actually attributed to the work we've done versus what might have happened between sessions, the team themselves, what changes in the organization were impacting on scores increasing or decreasing. So again, just always, as we do now with kind of team discovery, it's a conversation starter. I don't personally hold the any measurements, which I still do. Like Tammy Turner has a lovely phrase of the relational and commercial balance of an evaluation, because there is a need for some measurements and evidence in some teams in some situations, but holding them as conversation starters, as data points, not as evidence. Given my background, I don't have that research theory behind me to be able to back it up and have control groups. So there are my kind of three learnings in terms of co-creating with the team. Don't drive in with my offer of evaluation. The second, seeing the evaluation as an intervention itself. And the third, and with the disruption, which I think, Caroline, you're going to speak to in your story in a moment. And then also the third around kind of positioning them, for me, given my background, as conversation starters, because that's where the story and the change happens and how the team it sees itself. But there was also a question, Caroline, as I hand over to you from Anna around psychological safety and the measurements. So I know you're going to, unless you've changed your story since we spoke.
So yeah, I think, there's been so much learning that Jen and I have had together, and in our own work over the years in this space. And there's one team I'm reflective of, financial services organization I worked with a few years ago, and part of what at that point they had been doing a lot of work on team psychological safety across the organization. And so what they wanted to do as we started work with the executive team was to really do some tracking or measurement around psychological safety as part of this process. So we agreed up front in conversations around tracking the impact that we'd do at time 1 and time 2 at the end of the process on psychological safety. I use Peter Coelier's survey instrument to do that. It's a lovely simple tool that gives the team some very simple and easily accessible information. So we did that, started the process, spoke to some sponsors, stakeholders, and used that as all part of data to track, okay, what is it that we as a team want to work on and change, and what will that serve then in terms of what our stakeholders and our sponsors are looking for from us as we go forward. So that was the board, that was some customers, and that was some of their own reports and teams themselves that we did a little bit of tracking around. So we were kind of focusing on all of that and working in that. And as you'll all know, as you get into team coaching, then what we started to do was also surface the stuff that hadn't come through potentially in discovery. So new issues started to emerge, and actually what emerged there was, okay, well, we need to work in that. But that, as Jenna said, was disruptive. So there was discomfort in that. Patterns were being kind of broken apart. The team were trying to unlearn, and we were working through that process. And we came to the point where we had pre-agreed that we'd do a time 2 on the psychological safety work. And so we did that, and the scores had dropped. So this actually, it showed you we decreased. So there was a little bit of a panic from me. It's like, oh, flip, from the team lead themselves. And so off we went into kind of the next session with the team. We were moving towards a closing phase at this point. And actually, in the room, in the conversations, the team were like, it's okay. That's okay, because this is part of the journey. The scores have dropped because, do you know what? We were probably just being too polite before. We were doing a little bit of saying what we thought we should say or what everybody wanted us to say. But actually now we're digging in and we're doing the real work in terms of what's blocking us from really collaborating, what's blocking us from really naming the hard issues and staying with them and working through them, so that the decisions we make, we commit to and we follow through afterwards. And that's harder. And so we've had to take some risks in doing that, and we feel a little bit at sea. But actually, this is the work that we need to do. And for me, that was huge learning in terms of, the data in itself is not absolute. The data is just part of the journey, and it's always interesting, and you can't tie team coaching up with a little bow. at the end of the session, or at the end of the process, because as Jen talked about there, it's always changing and evolving in terms of what's going on with the team. So that was really good learning for me. Other learning that I've had over the years is sponsors and stakeholders are really important. And getting their voice around evaluation and tracking the team is really important. However, what I've learned, and Jen, this was part of our work together and our learning, was that sometimes it's important to be intentional and choiceful about when you bring those voices in. Because if the team um, are not mature, if they're very polite and collegial with each other, that can actually mean that they get really disrupted with the sponsors too early, before maybe they're ready to do that. So for me, that's been good learning about when do we bring those voices in and how do we do that skillfully in relation to supporting the team on their particular journey. And I don't think there's any right answer there, but it's something in my learning that I'm very considerate of now and think about in terms of kind of how we put together what a discovery or diagnostic process may look like. The other piece, I love, in any learning work I'm doing, to get some feedback in terms of how we're doing. How is this working? Be that a session, a workshop, whatever that might be. And as you all know, one of the traditional ways to measure that are the happy sheets, the reaction forms, which track what you do. In training, those obviously track things like how was the lunch and how was the experience and how was the trainer and a little bit of what did you learn. Which is helpful and useful data to get at that very foundational level. I do have clients who still want to use that for team coaching. So if we are tracking in that kind of way at that level in team coaching, one of the things that I have learned is that, and as Jen said, with the disruption, that part of what I'll work to track at that level is how are the team taking responsibility. So in the learning questions, how are the team taking responsibility for their learning and their change? And that's kind of helpful for me at that point. So yes, absolutely. If there's feedback on me or my partner as team coaches, then I'm thinking, okay, how did your team coach work with you in relation to the contract they agreed with you? So we're connecting it into something that we have agreed together. So it's grounded in our reality in relation to what they've requested or what they feel they need from us. And then other parts of the questions will be around, and what are you taking responsibility as a team? What are you taking responsibility for as a team member? What are you learning about this team? What are you learning about yourself within this team? And what therefore do you feel committed to changing as a result of that? So trying to keep that ownership and responsibility with them. And for me, that's the real fundamental shift from training and facilitation into coaching, because it's where the team members own part of this, that it's not about us entertaining or creating a wonderful experience where everybody feels jazzed, because we know at the end of the day that doesn't create sustainable change. And so therefore how we actually enable the team to, from the very beginning, take responsibility. So the client does want to bring that level in, that's where I would be working with them to try and create something that actually co-creates shared responsibility then for coaches and the team. And I guess that takes us into, if we just think about kind of two emerging schools of thought that we'll ask you to do a little bit of breakout work in relation to in a moment. So, many of our clients will speak to us in terms of evaluation, and they may come from one of these different schools. And we know from the earlier slide that these are just actually different stages of evolution in the overall field. But depending on your clients, their culture, the organization, the system they work within, they may be drawn to one or the other. So we have the more traditional or structured way of working, where the client will be interested in predefined and measurable objectives agreed with stakeholders in the team in advance. They'll look for evidence, so quantitative data. They'll be interested in seeing how you can seek that. So KPIs, performance data, these could be your employee engagement surveys, feedback, 360 feedback on the team, that kind of thing, financial information and data. The timing, so there's your evaluations, your happy sheets can be part of that. Frame, so you're lining it with Kirkpatrick's, Phillips, what are you doing there? And context where sponsors need defensible and financially framed evidence and where the goals are stable and clear. And as I said earlier, what I've noticed in recent years that many clients who want to work at that level to the ROI will generally say, because of the investment around that, it needs to be a big program so we can really track it and bring it back at some level with informed data on the impact on financial metrics, KPIs, etc. We also have then the more emergent and adaptive approach, and Egla mentioned that Jen and I are part of Team Coaching Studio faculty, and one of our colleagues in the Team Coaching Studio, Sebastian Fox, has done some really interesting research, if you're interested in exploring that, around this emergent outcomes and tracking kind of the emergent nature within team coaching. And his suggestion is that, what happens is we can set out outcomes at the beginning that we're seeking, or success factors from a team coaching process. However, we don't know what we don't know and what might emerge as we go through it. And the example I spoke about, really resonates for me in relation to that. So therefore, the thinking here is we need to be able to adapt. Yes, we can start and think about some, outcomes that we're seeking for and select those from the system as well. So get the voices of the stakeholders in the system involved in this, but also things are going to emerge as we go, and we need to be able to adapt and work with those. So this works well when we're looking for outcomes. So we're seeking stakeholder expectations and not necessarily been driven by metrics. So the evidence is mixed. Here it's more qualitative, so focusing on trust dynamics, psychological safety, alongside any quantitative measures as well. Evaluation is embedded and iterative throughout, and that's to capture those emerging pieces that are coming as we go that we didn't know before we started. The frame, it's rooted in the New World Kirkpatrick model, and it works well for our work. Where you've got complexity in a team context where the outcomes can't be fully specified, and where you've got multiple and diverse stakeholders, so you've got lots of voices from the system that you're tracking. So I guess, there's no right or wrong way. And with any team coaching work, you want to meet your client where they are. But I guess just to set out that those are, two distinct ways of working that your clients may or may not be drawn to, or you indeed yourself may or may not be drawn to. And so we thought we'd give you a little bit of an opportunity just to explore these a wee bit more in breakout groups.
Coming from team number one, we were on the traditional structure approach. And first of all, before entering in our topic, thank you for sharing with Caroline your perspective, the study, the challenges that you went through, because the importance of measure is sometimes based on the client demand, but also is our internal demand as you share. And it is pretty important that we are aware that we also need sometimes to have some practical and quantitative element to grasp in order to justify our presence also in organization. And we discussed with the team how to also balance those kind of two different approaches. The first seems to be more quantitative, the second more qualitative. We also discussed that sometimes we can focus on performance, what we can see the team can do differently versus outcome, how this kind of different behavior or whatever kind of evolution is going to bring to the organization. And those are two different ways of measuring also the impact that we generate with teams. Another interesting perspective has been timing. If we only have 3 months of intervention with the team, we could expect to see some changing in some way of interacting to each other, probably. Would be difficult to link those kind of change in outcomes, because probably outcomes are a bit more longer in terms of time, in terms of maturation. And second point, outcomes are multifactorial. So we cannot isolate the result based on our intervention. This is going to be pretty challenging. And it's also sort of sloppy, let's say, ground that we would not to enter, because it's a matter of combining different elements that works together in order for the team to reach an outcome. So bottom line, we believe that it's important to have a way of measuring our impact, also to show to the team what they could reach. So it's not only measuring our own ability to help the team, but also the team ability to mature to a different level. This is what we found important and relevant in also helping up in the establishing agreement part of the conversation, especially with stakeholder, because it's a relevant element to also justify their own time, not only resources in terms of money, but also time to be invested.
I think that time horizon of the change the team might see in itself and feel in itself to others seeing it is an important factor. And you also prompted, as things are so multifactored, that it's important not to stay too far emergent and exploratory, to have those moments of grounding and conversations and that structured view so that it doesn't become too nebulous, the change for the team, that they can name it and see it.
Absolutely. Also awareness, it's a sort of outcome, if you think. So if you become more aware of the way that you function, this is already an upgrade of your level of interaction.
Is that a place,
If
Dave?
there is any other
Yeah.
additional comment from team one, more than welcome to also enrich the discussion.
Who'd come in next?
From the more emergent side, one thing we chatted about, and I really liked what one of you said there, that emergent outcomes are welcomed as valid. Sometimes there's outcomes that we never even anticipated that come up, and we need to see them as valid and to celebrate them. So an example I began to give in our group was I was coaching a student for a number of years, a severely handicapped student. And he kept coming back, but I kept feeling like, boy, everything I've coached him around, goals that he's aiming for, he keeps missing. And I felt like, wow, I'm really failing, because he wants to do this, he wants to accomplish that, and nothing was working out, but he kept coming back. And a couple of years later, he gave a pitch to other students to join the coaching program at his university. And he was very enthusiastic, and he started just reporting all these amazing results in his life. His grade point average went way up, and 2 or 3 things where his life improved. And I was sitting there really confused because those topics had never even come up in our coaching. And I'm like, what? And everybody thought I was some kind of a heroic coach. And I'm like, we didn't even talk about those things. And then I began to realize, I think just someone giving him attention and acceptance and affection became developmental rocket fuel for him. So this was a not unexpected result in multiple areas of his life. It's that emergent outcomes that we were not even talking about. And so that's more on the qualitative rather than the quantitative side.
Which are so impactful. They're the real meaning, the real change. And I think with that, with teams, contracting for that upfront, letting the clients know that there may be things that the team doesn't know about itself that may become more important than these early goals that we're defining. Lovely. Anyone else with perspective or insight from their group?
I can give a little glimpse of what happened in our room.
Thanks,
So we had a very lively discussion and a very short one as the time for some reason just was over. So we had a very good one. What was interesting was that we had approaches basically going really from the prospect of working with the team, but also talking with stakeholders, which need not be the same person or need not be the same people that you actually work with. So, for example, when we're talking about the ROI, the ROI relevant for the stakeholder sending the people in might be very, very different from the ROI that is relevant from the person that actually gets the training or the coaching, to be more specific. So one thing that I wanted to suggest coming from the executive coaching side, working with executives, it's very interesting to see that executives can have very different kind of goals. For instance, losing weight to be fitter, which is something that doesn't really cover what the company wants from the executive. So it's still part of the coaching program. And this covert sign or this covert goal, I let the executive grade how much the impact would be on their performance, because obviously the executive is doing their work. I can influence mindset. I can help with perspective. And with this caveat, I can let the executive actually decide on what is relevant on the ROI, which, as far as I understood so far, is kind of a bridge to the ROE. Like, what is my expectation from the coaching, but how does it actually impact my work power? So this was one thing I wanted to finish on in our group. This was not everything that we discussed. So feel free from my group who would like to add on upon this.
I'm just noticing time as well.
Yeah. I love the idea, Phil, what you said around the and your group in terms of the bridge and I mean just our final thought maybe to share is some thinking we have in terms of just how you bridge them, which is that holistic approach. Jen, do you want to throw the slide
Yeah.
up there just really quickly?
Thank you for the spokespersons. I know we didn't hear from everyone, but even just the
Thank
few
you.
that
Yeah.
we did. Thank you.
Yeah. So again, that with that idea of, blending and working with the client, so every approach will be designed for the client. So I guess for us, and you can start by commissioning together, starting with your stakeholders, surfacing the expectations from people, and use your discovery and contracting processes to really dig into this and start to picture what it could be, and also thinking about your how you'll deal with those emergent pieces as they come. Think about the evidence, how you'll track this, and that lovely mix of quantitative and qualitative evidence can be really helpful. Track it throughout, make it part of the process. As Jen says, the evaluation is part of the intervention. It's something in itself, so work on it throughout. And then as you feed back and report, be aware of the nuance in terms of there will be measurable outcomes, but what's the story of change? What sits behind it and beneath it, in terms of the culture of the team and how that can ripple out. So those are just some of our thoughts. Thank you for today. It's always lovely just to have this conversation. So thanks, Egla and Team Coaching Circle, for inviting us along. And Egla, will hand back to you just to close.
Thank you, Jennifer, Caroline. Appreciate such a thoughtful, honest conversation today. Real generosity in what you've shared. If we could flip the slide back, I just wanted to acknowledge, both of you and invite all who joined today. If you want to continue conversation with Jennifer, Caroline, here you can find the hidden links, LinkedIn's, and connect. Do kind of continue these conversations as you wish so. And again, just wanted to really appreciate such a powerful and thoughtful session today.